Normally it doesn't worry me at all, but the last few nights I haven't slept too well, thinking that I was going to have to stand up in front of my peers and answer questions on health and safety. Prior to me becoming a branch secretary, I was a branch health and safety officer for about 21 years. The essence of the speech that I'm going to give you comes in three parts: yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Where we've come from, where we currently are, and where we're going to be. I say we because health and safety isn't I, it isn't me, it's a team. It's we collectively, as a group of health and safety reps within either a single union or within a collection of unions. And it's interesting that, this marks the 40th anniversary of the Health and Safety Work Act. We don't have the Health and Safety Work Act in Northern Ireland. The Health and Safety Work Order. It seemed to take 5 years to transgress from London to Belfast. And maybe things go slow with us, but we learn fast. I've been employed by the Health Service for 30-something years. Whenever I started, I had long, blonde, curly hair. Look at me now. But I soon learned that health and safety wasn't the priority. They still lived under the auspices of a thing called Crown immunity. How many people in the room remember what Crown immunity is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, come on, put the hands up. Because this is an interactive speech and I'll keep on asking questions to make sure you haven't put you to sleep. Crown immunity let employers get away with murder. And I don't mean to say that that means getting away with doing nothing. It meant getting away with murder because people died in work. Employers didn't care because there was no responsibility, there was no comeback. We provided first-class health service in Northern Ireland through 30 years of conflict. We provided the best possible care to people. But did the employer care about the people that provided the service? No. The number of accidents was absolutely amazing. Simple things that should have been taken care of were never taken care of. There was never maintenance. Heavy polished floors as soon as the place was wet, and the roof leaked more times than enough. There was an umpteen accidents. That was just the tip of the iceberg. A colleague of mine, a guy called Tony Curley, was originally the branch health and safety officer. And he invited me to become part of his team many, many years ago. And I got sucked in. And I really mean sucked in. My first health and safety committee meeting of what was then the Royal Group of Hospitals, which was under the Eastern Health and Social Services Board, was one director who was forced to go there by the general manager because nobody else wanted to go. And about 16 health and safety reps from various trade unions, and they spent 2 hours arguing, and not one question was answered. And after 3 or 4 meetings, Tony himself and a few of the other health and safety reps said, "This is getting us nowhere. We haven't stopped one accident, we haven't made one improvement, we haven't progressed things. What have we done for our members? What can we do?" We analysed what resources we had within what was Newbie at the time, which is now UNISON. And we realised that we had a big deficit. We didn't focus on health and safety, we didn't train enough people, we didn't have enough bodies on the ground. So we went out to the other trade unions, and they were all in the same boat. And we stuck our neck out and we said, well, why don't we join in a partnership here? Why don't we approach this together collectively? Why don't we start making demands with one voice? And other trade unions came back after a few days and said, that's not a bad idea. So the first thing that we did was we used the safety reps and safety committees of divisions. We sent the formal letters, we demanded a proper health and safety committee structure. It was granted within 3 weeks, but it took 3 years to actually set up and put in place. Now, over those years, we addressed a hell of a lot of issues. The first one was the slips, trips and falls, fixing the roof, using different types of floor surfacing, stopping the burnishing and the heavy polishing floors that looked good but were absolutely atrocious. The second big issue was manual handling. The number of nurses that retired due to FACK injuries was absolutely amazing. Whenever we analysed the 4 hospitals within our branch, there wasn't one hoist for lifting patient. Oh, we forgot the bedding. We didn't have the money. That was the answer originally. So we progressed that to the point where back injuries and ill health retirement now are 5% of what they were 20 years ago. So that's made a difference. We then identified other issues. And we decided, well, we need to do this in a planned, creative way. We decided to map out the various parts of the site, allocate health and safety reps from whatever trade union to those working as a team. And then we addressed the issues as far as severity. And we picked what was the worst issues and we worked our way through them. One which has taken a heck of a long time to progress, but one which I think is one of the best examples that I can give you, was needle stick injuries. We had thousands of needle stick injuries because of the careless disposal of sharps within the acute setting, within the primary setting, within the community setting. We had members who had multiple needle stick injuries and were going through sheer hell because they didn't know if they had contacted various different diseases. There was no immunology policy. There was no proper health surveillance policy. In fact, there was no proper health and safety policy. So we decided we'd change all that. And we were able to change the policy bit. And we were able to change, the instructions, the training, the directives that were given to management. But we still faced archaic structures and risk managers who said, oh, it's cheaper to pay a claim than it is to actually buy something new. One example was the waste team. They disposed of all the waste. And between 10 people, there was 72 injuries inside a 36-week period. We said that's not enough. We identified the PPE. We priced it. We arranged that it could be bought. And the health and safety manager said, no, that's going to cost 10,000. Why should I do that? A claim against the trust will cost 4,000. So the next case that went to court, we stood up and we said, well, this health and safety manager said it's easier to pay out 4,000 than 10. Thankfully, we got a good judge. He turned around and said, well, every needle stick injury from now on, they'll pay 10. The gloves were supplied the next day. But more importantly, and more seriously, we decided, well, this just isn't good enough. Why should people suffer that again and again and again? Because that's what was happening. So we decided that we'd put this through a legal route and we'd take a test case. And it took about 7.5 years for that to progress. It ended up in the European courts. But we managed to change European law. That's one branch with about 12 health and safety reps representing their members, protecting them. If we can do it, anybody can do it. We're not special. I'm just learning to do it. That we long in the tooth and short in the hair. But at the end of the day, it's passion, it's caring, but more importantly, it's not giving up. First thing that was said to me by Tony Curley many years ago was, health and safety is a long game. It's not a quick fix, it's a long-term solution. It's taken me 25 years to find that out. But I've stuck with it. It's not just me, it's a collection of people. There's people who've been part of that, who have now gone, who have retired, who have left, and there's new people coming on board. The Royal Group of Hospitals transformed into one of the super trusts. It's now called the Belfast Trust. It's the largest single employer in Northern Ireland. It employs somewhere in excess of 20,000 people. It has a budget of £1.1 million, one which is currently under attack by our good Minister for Health, a guy called Edmund Poots, who has had to listen to me for many years now calling for him to resign. There's one difference between Edmund Poots and any Minister for Health in England, Scotland or Wales. Edmund Poots is also the Minister, his full title in fact, is the Minister for Health and Public Safety, which means he's in charge of the HSE&I. He dictates their budget. He's the person that directs and puts forward health and safety legislation. And he's also the guy that has to listen to me day in, day out. And I love giving that guy a headache. I said to him at the gates of Stormont, which is our local assembly, one day, I suppose you're fed up with me calling for you to resign live on TV. He said, no, I don't mind that. I don't watch the news anymore, Ray, because I have to listen to you. And he said, don't call me a turkey farmer anymore. I said, why? Our members aren't turkeys waiting for Christmas. You do your job and I won't call for you to resign. But he is a turkey because he's not delivering the service that he needs, either to provide proper health and safety, not only for the people who work within the health service, but for the people of Northern Ireland, because he's responsible for health and safety for all of them. More importantly, it's the people that we serve, the people that the health service provides for, are getting the short shift in this. They're getting the raw deal. Thankfully, we haven't had people dying in ambulances outside ED departments, but it's come very close. So we're fighting not only for our members and their rights and their welfare, but we're fighting for their working conditions, because currently, this week, the ED department of the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast has not only had in excess of 100 people waiting at any given time to be seen before they're even treated, but it's also turned into 2 wards as well, where there's been in excess of 30 people waiting on beds. The health and safety issue there is for the staff involved, who are double and triple jobbing, who are stressed out. Staff with 30 odd years experience, who are standing in the middle of an ED department crying because they can't cope. These are professional staff who trained for many years, who care, who work day and night to provide a service. They're our members. We have a duty to protect them, and we will. That's why Pat McCauley himself, yet again this week, have called for the Minister to resign. And I'm going to take this opportunity now at the Hazards Conference to do it again. We deserve better. Back to my original speech. You've heard what's happened in the past. Where we currently are is we have a functioning, working Health and Safety Committee which is leading the development of health and safety within Northern Ireland, which is cutting edge but doesn't have a budget. The employer will not give a dedicated health and safety budget for its staff because of cuts. It's afraid of the government cutting it first, because it has already admitted the first target of any cuts is health and safety. That's the health warning here and now for all our members across the UK. The first place the cuts is going to stop is at health and safety. They won't do the inspections, they won't meet the demands, they won't improve health and safety, they won't protect our members from those accidents. A couple of the other developments that I would like to highlight that have occurred over the last few years, and we try to pick some catchy names for things. Risk assessment has always been our cornerstone, and the demand that management carries out proper, effective, competent risk assessments. Whenever we started doing this, about 3% of the workforce was covered by health and safety risk assessments. I can guarantee you now, statistically 97% of the staff within the Belfast Trust are currently covered by risk assessments. We introduced the thing about about 15 years ago now, and it was called Risk Assessment 2000. And it was a strategy document to try not to create generic risk assessments, but to create a format with pillars that would ensure that risk assessments were complete, that they were adequate, that they were realistic, that they were fit for the purpose, and to make sure that they were accomplished and done. More than that, that they were live documents and that they would progress into the future. 5 years ago, that progressed into a new format, something called BRAT, the Belfast Risk Audit Tool. That has changed how our health and safety has been viewed. That has changed how health and safety has been developed for one simple reason. The one thing that we got included within the tool, which was never in anything before, was the cost liability formula. Every year for the last 5 years, the liability against the Belfast Trust has been in the region of £21.7 million. That's outstanding claims owed to its staff because we have encouraged our members to take legal cases against the Trust for negligence. because it's the one way the employer realises how much an accident costs. They have to fork out good, hard cash. They can't hide the overtime bills, they can't hide the additional staff that they bring in, they can't do other things, they have to pay out the money. And at the end of the day, questions are asked under accountability within the Northern Ireland financial framework. Why are you spending out this money? And if you think £21.7 million is a shock, it's a hell of a lot less than what it used to be. 15 years ago, the figure was 127 million. So I think we're doing a job. Now, that's what it's currently like. The most important thing is, what is it going to be like tomorrow? What's it going to be like next week, next year? We all only have a finite time for our working lives, although the government would like us to work a hell of a lot longer. We have to develop for the future. And what I would say is we have a strong new generation of health and safety reps that are moving things forward. And the prime example of that is, I wasn't originally due to be the speaker here this week. It was to be a girl called Carmen Bagioni. She's one of our health and safety reps. Unfortunately, because of family commitments, she can't be here today. But she is the winner of this year's Health and Safety Rep of the Year award because of her work on BRAT and on risk assessment and improving working lives. She's one of a team. The most important thing, though, that the Trust realised is, not only is she the first female recipient of that award, but in the last 7 years, the Belfast Trust Health and Safety Reps have won that award 3 times. Twice it's went to UNISON, and I'm exceptionally proud of that. Where do we go to the future? We are going to go bigger, stronger, better. We're going to fight the fight, we're going to make those improvements. If we can do it, we're just ordinary people. We can do it even better in the future because we have the knowledge, we have the experience, we have the perseverance. We're not afraid of going in front of the TV cameras. We're not afraid of challenging politicians. We're not afraid of challenging management. If you don't stand up, be counted, fight the fight, demand your legal rights, you will be walked on. We're not prepared to allow that to happen. The most important thing is that we organise, that we inform, educate and communicate with our members. 1, to make sure they know what their rights are. 2, that they know what the law is. And 3, that we're there to help and support them. And that we will move situations forward for them to make improvements, to protect them. That is the most important thing. Once we've done that, we can effectively challenge management. We've done it for years, we'll do it again for the future. We have a new generation that will continue it. Thank you.
Tom O'Connor has been involved in workers' safety and health activism for over 25 years. He was until recently the Executive Director of the US National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, which is the coordinating organisation for the 18 local COSH groups, or coalitions on occupational safety and health. Now, the reason why we've asked Tom here is because the COSH groups are sort of similar to the hazard centres and occupational health groups and sort of things that we have in this country, which started up at the same time. And the national COSH that Tom was the director of is sort of equivalent to the Hazards Campaign, but with a lot more money. Tom has had a long-standing interest in building relationships with worker health and safety activists internationally and has attended conferences and meetings in Europe. He's come to our European Work Hazards Network conferences, and he's attended the Asian Network for the Rights of Occupational and Environmental Victims in Asia, and also in Central and Southern America. And he has a particular focus on issues relating to immigrant workers, and he's presented at lots of conferences over the years, and we've known him for a very long time. He has retired from that position now, and he's actually living in Greece at the moment, but we're very pleased to have him here to tell us about what's going on in America, which is both our past and also the ghost of our future. And so we're very pleased to have you, Tom, to speak to us. Thank you.
So much for the invitation to join you all here, to have this opportunity both to share some of our experiences from the US, but also to learn from all the great experience from all the people that are in this room and at this conference. And I knew I would learn a lot this weekend talking to all of you, but I didn't expect that I would learn something really important just from the logistics introduction. That's something that we can really bring back. Do you really have a minibus that goes around all the local pubs? Is that true? That's brilliant. We definitely need to bring that back. We usually try to keep people in one place on the conference site so they don't get away. It's brilliant. So, as Hilda mentioned, I have worked for many years in the COSH network. I was the director of the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, or the National COSH, for the last several years. And we are the umbrella organization or coordinating body, like the UK Hazards Campaign, at the national level for the COSH network, which are the local and statewide groups that we have around the US. These are committees. COSH groups are committees or coalitions on occupational safety and health. They're not part of the government. People hear our names often and think that we're OSHA, the equivalent of the HSE, but we are NGOs, nonprofit organizations. And we have been built on a coalition model that brings together not only the traditional labor unions, but also people who are public health professionals, attorneys, student activists, family members of people who've been injured or killed on the job, injured workers themselves, and anybody else who's interested in promoting worker health and safety. So that from the beginning has been our model. So as Hilda said, the reason I'm here today is to try to talk with you, to share some of the experiences that we've had in the current worker health and safety environment in the US, which, as Hilda also said, is looking more and more like where you all are headed. So it would be a cautionary tale, I'm afraid, of where you might be going. And to share some of our strategies in the COSH movement for addressing the challenges we faced. Before getting into that, I wanted to echo what Hilda said in the introduction, that when we talk about worker health and safety, we often talk about the numbers, the 5,000 or so people who are killed in the U.S. Just from traumatic injuries, and maybe 10 times that number from illness and disease every year. But each one of those is an individual story, each one is an individual tragedy. Each person has family and loved ones that they have left behind, and they've lost their lives only because they went to work and they were not planning on risking their lives. So we'd like to remember the faces and the names of those people, which we emphasize every year in our annual Workers' Memorial Day commemorations. So just a little bit of quick history. The first COSH groups were formed after the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act in the early 70s. And the goal was, seeing that workers now had these new rights under this national law, to ensure that workers knew about these rights and knew how to use them in order to protect their health and safety on the job. And the COSH groups tended to form in areas where we had strong labor unions and worked very closely with labor unions from the very beginning. And the mission of the COSHs is to advocate for stronger worker health and safety protections at both the national level and at the state level, since that's a possibility in the U.S. that some health and safety laws are developed at the state level. And so we work for stronger OSHA laws, new and stronger regulations, and also for stronger enforcement of the existing laws and regulations. We also do a lot of training and education, as we're doing here this weekend, for workers and union members on protecting their health and safety on the job and using their rights under OSHA. And we also do just general public education through the media and other channels about the importance of strong workplace protections to try to build stronger public support for this cause. So I'm going to try to give a quick 5-minute overview of what I see as the current worker health and safety environment in the U.S. And I just wanted to mention that there's 2 other great health and safety activists from the U.S. here, Nancy Lesson from the Steelworkers, who you'll be hearing from tomorrow, and Maggie Robbins. Let's see, there's Maggie back there, who's also a long-time health and safety and COSH activist, as is Nancy. So I hope that you have a chance to talk with them this weekend and get some of their impressions to add to this picture. So we're a little bit over 40 years after the passage of the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Act, and sadly we have to say that most workers don't truly enjoy the protections that the COSH Act is supposed to guarantee, because of the fact that most workers don't really feel safe in reporting hazards and speaking up for their health and safety, which was what the fundamental idea of the COSH Act was. Because of widespread intimidation by employers using all sorts of means and tricks that, as you all well know, there are many ways to keep people feeling afraid to speak up for their health and safety. We don't have really truly strong whistleblower protection that will allow people to speak up without fear of retaliation. And we have fewer and fewer workers in unions that provide the real protection for people to speak up. We also have a chronically underfunded OSHA. I know that this has been a major issue for you here with the HSE recently, but this is a long-term problem we've had with far too few inspectors inspecting all the workplaces in the U.S. And the fines that OSHA is able to impose when there are violations of the Act are pathetically low, so low to the point that most employers will not necessarily bother about fixing hazards if they can just pay a small fine. And we find that workers are still exposed to many hazards that are not regulated because our standard setting process has never really worked well, and now it's truly dysfunctional. We don't have any process that allows OSHA to develop and promote new regulations because they've been held up due to political obstacles. Just a quick illustration of this problem of OSHA inspectors. We actually, in terms of per million workers, they peaked in the early days of the agency and dropped by about half within the last few years. Now I think that this chart only goes to 2008. That's kicked up a little bit in the last few years, but still the situation exists that we only have enough OSHA inspectors to reach every workplace on average about once every 100 years. So most employers don't have a big concern about having a surprise visit from OSHA. Another issue that I know is also a big concern here, the difficulty of filing a successful criminal prosecution in cases of extremely negligent employer behavior. And we all know that nothing gets a manager's attention more than the threat of spending some time in jail. Unfortunately, that has been extremely rare. It's not impossible under other US laws. For example, this refers to the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. In 1 year, they referred 371 cases for criminal prosecution of environmental laws. So it's been quite successful when somebody has been found to be polluting or contaminating a river or polluting the air, that they can be prosecuted criminally. But in the whole first 40 years of OSHA's existence, there were only 84 cases that were referred for criminal prosecution. And of those, only a handful actually were successfully prosecuted. So, as is often the case, crimes against workers are often not taken as seriously as crimes against the environment or crimes that threaten the food supply, etc. Unfortunately, the way that the COSH Act is written, even an extremely negligent employer can only be charged with a misdemeanor in the case of a worker death, which is a very minor, almost like a traffic ticket. In recent years in the U.S., we've seen a series of major catastrophes, worker disasters, and you all know that the media tends to pretty much ignore the daily carnage in the workplace, where a worker dies here, a worker dies there, nobody ever pays any attention to it. But if there's a catastrophic explosion and several people are killed at once, then there's attention to the issue, there's a stream of news articles, there's discussion, it gets attention. That's happened several times in the U.S. in recent years. This was a Tesoro refinery in Washington State. We had several refinery explosions. We had the biggest mine fatality incident at the Upper Big Branch mine, where some 29 miners were killed. We had, of course, the Deepwater Horizon explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. We had a series of major catastrophes, and we thought this is a real opportunity for some legislation and regulation that's going to change things. Unfortunately, the result of this was no significant new legislation, no significant new regulations protecting miners, oil rig workers, refinery workers, etc. Honestly, that was a big disappointment to us. We thought we had a Democratic president, we had a Democratic Congress, we had a series of major catastrophes. We thought if there's ever a time that we might move some new legislation and regulations to better protect workers, this was it. But unfortunately, we were not able to get any results in that area. One reason for that is just the nature of the U.S. Congress these days is that it's almost impossible to get anything through. It's basically a dysfunctional system now where no legislation from either side that's anything significant can get through. And we now have weaker unions that no longer have the clout to push through some of the priorities of both for worker safety and for other workplace reforms. So that's been a system that's been almost stuck in the legislative environment. And this has also been true in terms of new regulations. There's, as you have experienced here in the UK recently, the dominance of this extreme anti-regulatory rhetoric. And our opponents in this fight have succeeded in repeating this lie over and over that job-killing regulations are destroying the economy. And that there's been this torrent of regulations that's come out from the Obama administration, when in fact there's been very few. And but they have repeated this lie often enough that it has been accepted as the truth. We have actually a very pro-worker leadership in OSHA now. We don't have Rory O'Neill, but we have a pretty good substitute in our leadership of OSHA. There's people who are very committed to worker health and safety, but their efforts have been often squashed by the political people in the administration above them. This reminded me, when I saw this cartoon, we had great hopes that the Obama administration initially had the slogan, "Yes, we can," and there was a lot of hope that we were going to have some positive change for worker safety and the environment. And unfortunately, that oftentimes in the practice, this administration has been extremely timid and afraid to do anything that's going to upset the business interests in the party. And as a result, any major initiatives, truly substantive initiatives from the OSHA leadership have been squashed. So we haven't seen any major new initiatives. But there are some bright signs coming from the ground, from the grassroots. And I don't want to be overly negative because there has been some really exciting stuff going on at the grassroots level. So new organizing for minimum wage campaigns, temp worker rights, temporary contingent workers' rights, youth workers' rights, some really exciting actions going around the country on all kinds of worker issues. And the COSHs have tried to work to build on this success by working together with some of the, what we call non-traditional allies in the labor movement. And so why do we believe that this coalition strategy is a successful approach? Well, we feel like by building broader coalitions, not just working with the labor unions, that we can reach a broader audience through multiple networks of people who are involved in public health, attorneys, labor, students, etc. And there's an important factor in terms of the perceptions of the public and legislators that there's a strong base of support for stronger workplace health and safety regulations and laws. And it's not just a union issue. We know that health and safety has never been just a union issue, but we need to prove that to legislators by showing that we have broad support. And also, we have to face the reality that most unions in the U.S. no longer have the resources to put as much into health and safety as they used to. Now, there's some exceptions to that, the steelworkers being one of them that Nancy is representing, but they're few and far between. The health and safety departments of our major unions have shrunk dramatically in most cases, so they can't fight that battle alone. And there's also a lot of new actors in the U.S. labor movement, an opportunity to reach broader constituencies through those groups. And unfortunately, and I think you all probably have this problem here as well, that much of the media and the public thinks that this is a problem that's been solved long ago. Oh, that worker safety was a problem back in the days when there were a lot of miners and there were people who were producing a lot of automobiles, and nobody has those problems anymore. People who work, social workers don't have health and safety problems, and hospital workers don't have health and safety problems, right? I mean, why do we even talk about this anymore? So we're constantly having to overcome that misperception that we've already solved this problem, and that it's only industrial workers who have health and safety issues. As I said, we're also trying to reach out to diverse interest groups who have not traditionally been involved in health and safety issues. And one of the reasons for this is that we find that there are some issues that do get more visibility than worker health and safety, but we can work together with those groups to highlight our issues within their broader struggles. And that we've been done successfully with some youth groups to emphasize the youth work issues. Issues around abuse of immigrant workers. We've worked successfully with many immigrants' rights groups on those issues, and issues around temp workers. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So in a nutshell, we've tried to make health and safety more of an integral part of the broader struggle for workers' rights. We've done a lot of work, particularly with day labor organizations. We have a huge network of workers around the country who go out on the street and look for work every day as day laborers, and there's been some really successful organizing of these groups. And of course, health and safety is just one of the issues that they are concerned about, but we've tried to highlight those issues together with them. We've done that by inviting many of these organizations to our national conference. We have also, because many of these workers are non-English speaking, particularly Spanish speakers, we've made our national conference annually a completely bilingual event where we have simultaneous interpretation. So that we've made a real effort to bring those people into our network, and it's been very successful. We've also, many of the local COSH groups offer English as a second language classes and training for people in their language on workers' rights. And that has been a very successful strategy because many workers might not come to our COSH groups because they're concerned about health and safety, but they might come for another reason, because they want to learn English, because they want to learn about how to get a job. And so sometimes by offering other services like that, our groups can reach these people and get them engaged in health and safety activism. And we've done that quite successfully in many cases. We've also had some very successful youth groups, building youth groups to promote greater awareness of the hazards and the issues that young workers face. We've worked on the legislative and regulatory area to promote stronger protections for young workers. This is an example of a group in Massachusetts. It's called Teens Lead at Work. It's a great program where they train teens about their rights on the job, and then those teens train other young people. So it's a really great program to get young people involved and aware about their rights as workers, both today and in the future. We've also built some strong coalitions with temporary worker groups. We've built a strong alliance with the group National Staffing Workers Alliance and other temp worker advocates, and we've successfully pushed OSHA to take very seriously this issue of protections of temp workers who often fall through the cracks in enforcement. But this hasn't been without challenges. This strategy, which focuses more broadly on different constituencies, not just on traditional labor movement. There's been some folks in the labor movement who felt like, well, the COSHs and the health and safety movement should really just be focused on building union power, and that it's sort of diluting our focus. But we argue that 90% of private sector workers in the U.S. not being in the union, we can't ignore those groups, and by reaching out to them and helping organize those folks and connecting them with unions, we can promote the union message that union workers are safer and healthier. So there's been a little bit of tension there, but I think we've worked that out over the years. So just in summary, want to kind of give a few thoughts on what we've done well in our coalitions. I feel like we've built strong coalitions both with traditional organized labor and with new forms of worker organizations like the temp workers and the day labor organizers. And we've gotten better visibility in recent years to health and safety issues. That hasn't necessarily translated into policy changes, but there has been a lot more media coverage of the issue in recent years, and I think that's been a real success for us. And as Hilda mentioned, we have managed to attract some national level funding, and I shouldn't overemphasize this, we're not a big organization. The national organization only has 3 or 4 staff people, but that has allowed us to have a stable coordinating body to coordinate the activities of all our local groups and to coordinate our annual national conferences. So that's been very successful, very helpful. But there's a number of things that we could be doing better, of course. One is I think we need to have a clear strategy of how we are going to gain policy victories, given the problems that I mentioned earlier with the political and regulatory system. We have not really adapted to that and developed a clear strategy for how we're going to get some policy victories. Also, our network is not really truly national. We don't have COSH groups in many areas of the U.S., particularly where the unions are weak. And it's somewhat ironic, but in the areas where we're most needed, where there are very few unions and workers are most abused, that's where we have the least presence in the country. In large areas of the south and west of the U.S., we don't have any COSH groups, so that's an area we need to work on. Also, our funding is precarious. We have one government grant and one private foundation grant, and if one of those funding sources or both of them disappeared, we would be in big trouble, so we need to work more on that. And I think we can do a lot more of what we're doing here this weekend, which is building stronger international ties, and that's something I've been saying for a long time, and I would like us to try to do more of. And I was pleased to see that there's a workshop on Sunday on international solidarity, and that is something we've been working on more with the COSHs in the U.S. This is from our last national conference where we had 2 representatives from Bangladesh, Garment Workers Union organizers, who shared with us their struggles. And that's, I think, both inspirational for us, but also it's great to build these ties internationally. So I'd like to see more of that. So finally, just some contact information, our National COSH website, and we also have an email group that's open to anybody who's a health and safety activist, whether you're in the U.S. or not. It does tend to focus more on the U.S., but it's of interest to a broader audience. If you're interested, you can get on that email list. And that's my email if anybody is interested in contacting me. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you, and I look forward to talking more with you this weekend.
To speak, but it was part of our building of international links because it is always something in the Houses campaign that we think is actually extremely important. Okay, we're now coming to our last speaker, and I'm going to ask Trevor Burden to talk to us about his son Jason and how his son came to die and what that means to his family. Thank you.
Like to make people aware of the consequences of when health and safety laws are flown and broken. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak here tonight. But before I begin, I'd like to pay my respects to all the memories of those who died while at work and send my deepest sympathies to their families, friends and colleagues. I'm here to pay tribute and tell the story of our beautiful son Jason, who died whilst at work in Weir Dock, Sunderland, in December 2011. He was 19 years old and a Marine apprentice. 26th of the 6th, 92, our lives were changed forever. Jason was our firstborn. We were so proud. He was such a happy, content baby, always smiling. Jason grew up and became a caring, loving young lad. At school, he became popular. He made many friends. His teachers described him as a pleasure to teach. To be honest, it was a pleasure just to be in his company. In secondary school, he discovered his love for music, and he would spend many hours at his desk mixing his records, although he loved it was torture for us. He was also a very good goalkeeper. He played for his school football team in FC Simonside, a team I formed for Jason and his mates. I was blessed to coach and manage him, and I have so many fond memories. Jason and his teammates became friends for life. They grew up together, they had nights out together, they went clubbing, they even went on holiday to Ibiza together. His mates are still finding it difficult today to come to terms with losing their best mate. As well as his girlfriend of 6 years, Jason left behind his brother Josh, sister Rachel, who loved and cared for him deeply. Rachel, his sister, looked up to Jason. He was a big bro. She could always talk to him with her problems. He helped her with her homework. He cared and he loved for her so much. He would be so proud of how she is now employed as a gymnastics coach, of what she's dedicated her life to. And of Josh would torment, fight and wind him up. But Josh, he's been inspired by his big brother, who, like himself, he's become an outstanding goalkeeper and who now plays at Sunderland's Football Academy. I'm sure Jason will be standing behind him, cheering him on as he turns out for a game. I'm immensely proud of them and how they've powered through. I know Jason will be proud too, and how they've coped in such awful circumstances. As Jason left school, we were so proud of his grades and reports he received. He was so well thought of by his peers. And at the leaving ceremony of his school, he received a surprise award at the coolest lad in the school, in which he totally agreed with because he loved himself. But Jason really was the most loving, caring and funny lad anybody could ever wish to meet. He had his whole life ahead of him. Jason started his apprenticeship with Tank Slipway in engineering in 2008. He just carried on where he left off from at school. He was hard-working, intelligent, dedicated and studying hard for his big tech qualifications as a marine engineer. He was ever present, always available for overtime. He was a true asset to his company. Jason loved his job. He thrived on learning. He never moaned about his job, which I believe to be very, very rare nowadays. Tank Slipway in engineering is run by its owner Harry Wilson and his 4 sons as directors. As time wore on, Jason was identified as a talented young apprentice. Chris Wilson, one of the company's directors, who was also a qualified Brumble service engineer and agent for Brumble Bow Thrusters, had started by 2011 to sign Jason on jobs with the only other qualified service engineer, Anthony McCormack. Any work carried out on a Brumble thruster had to be done by a qualified Brumble service engineer, and he was also known as a maker's man and had to be factory trained in Brumble's factory in Norway. Jason had worked in Falmouth with Anthony McCormack, where they serviced thrusters while they were still attached to the ship's hull. Jason also worked on thrusters with Chris Wilson in Middlesbrough, a game where the thrusters were still attached in the hull. At this point, I'll explain to you how the bow thruster works. When a ship comes into dock, the thruster is a propeller and a hull which is in the side of the hull, and it is connected to an engine and a shaft, and it allows the propeller hull to push the ship into dock from the side, allowing the ship to move laterally. In 2011, Jason was sent to Brumble in Norway on a 3-week course. Jason loved it. He was learning the basics of the bow thruster. On returning home in November, whilst Chris Wilson and Al McCormack were working in Malta, Jason was sent to Hull to service the bow thruster on a ship called the Jura. He had to book his own travel, his own hotel, which Jason had to take out an overdraft with his bank to cover the cost, and which would be reimbursed in a later date. Jason was sent alone. His job title on his job sheet was Supervising Brumble Service Engineer, but on his pay slip, his rate of pay was that of an apprentice fitter. When Jason went to work on the bow thruster, he discovered that the hook had been corroded and the seals perished. He communicated with the engineers via phone calls, texts and emails. Jason was advised by the engineers in Malta to strip the thruster completely from the ship's hull and send it to Weir Dock, Sunderland, where new hub and seals will be ordered and refitted. Jason completed the task and the thruster was crated up. Although when the bow thrusters were in transit, they were meant to be boarded to a weight bearing support. But one of these, this was not available for my son. Jason completed the task. Jason blanked off the gyroscope, allowing her to sail to Scotland, where after the thruster had been repaired in Sunderland's viaduct, it will be refitted in Scotland at a later date. Early in 2011, Jason had begun to strip the old hull of its seals. Chris and Anne McCormack said in their witness statement that they kept an eye on Jason from their office. As Jason stripped the bow thruster in the Brumville workshop, there had been no risk assessment done. They both said on a couple of occasions that they told Jason to use wooden chocks to support the thruster. And on one occasion they sent Jason to get a wooden chock, and Jason had returned with a plank of wood. At Jason's inquest, I was allowed to question them and ask them, are we really talking about the same lad here? The one who was entrusted to strip a bow thruster from a ship's hull, or the one who couldn't decipher between a safety chock and a plank of wood? 7th December 2011, the port arrived in Sunderland. By this time, Chris Wilson and Anne McCormack were in Texas, America. The only two qualified Brumville service engineers were both out of the country. The thruster was removed from the Brumville workshop after Chris Wilson advised the yard manager, Dave Bell, to set Jason on the task of refitting the new bow thruster's hull and seals. It was removed from the Brumville workshop to the yard's fitting shop. And if Jason had any problems, he had no one to turn to, as no one was qualified within the yard to work on Brumville bow thrusters. The thruster was placed in a flat workbench in the fitting shop. Again, no risk assessment was done, as was their responsibility. Jason was left to work unsupervised, and the thruster was not properly secured to the workbench. In short, Jason was unnecessarily put at risk. And wouldn't you think this is the first time a Brumville thruster had been in the yard for many a year? And wouldn't you think this would be the most important time to complete a risk assessment? Jason began to refit the hull. Dave Bell, the yard manager, in his witness statement said he'd asked Jason, do you need wooden support to chock it? In which Jason replied no. Again, I asked, why would a manager of 40 years experience be asking a 19-year-old apprentice if he needed safety chocks? Surely we should have stopped him there and then in order to chock the thruster. On the 8th of December 2011, again, our lives would change forever. It was becoming a living nightmare. For around 10:30 that morning, Jason finished fitting the job. He finished refitting the oil seals in the rotation hub. Jason reached over the top of the hub, got hold of the bolt that would have fastened the propellers, and using his body weight began to test the hub was rotating. And with Jason not being given any training in stability, he had not realised that the bow thruster had become toggledy. As he rotated the thruster, weighing a ton, fell off the workbench, landing on his lower chest, stomach and leg. Our son lay trapped until his workmates managed to lift the thruster off him. He got to his feet, lay over the workbench, and then collapsed to his back. Jason was airlifted by the Great North Air Ambulance and flown to Newcastle RVI. Whilst on board, the doctor asked Jason's date of birth. He told him the 26th of the 6th, 92. It would be the last words Jason would say as he went into cardiac arrest. They battled desperately to revive Jason, but were down instead on landing. That morning, Maria was at work in Asda, and I was at work in my taxi. I received a phone call from my mother-in-law around 11 to come home to my home where the police were waiting. I arrived. A male and female officer told me Jason had been involved in an accident, but he was okay. The police wanted to take me to pick up Maria, my wife, in Asda, but I told them I wanted to be with my son and headed off to the hospital in my taxi. On arrival, I was shown to a room. In time, the doctor came in with a nurse and informed me the terrible news that Jason had died. I just froze, held my head, my body was rigid, My wife then arrived, not knowing how Jason was. I held her and told her Jason had died. She began to collapse. I had no strength to hold her, and I begged the doctors to help me. And I would have given anything to be in the place of my son to have taken his pain. In time, we were shown the room where our beautiful son just laid out. He just looked as though he was sleeping. I began to tell my family and loved ones the unbearable news that Jason had died. The morning, the 9th of December, the owners, Harry Wilson, and 3 directors, his sons, and a foreman came to my home to pay their respects. We asked the question what had happened to our son. They told us that Jason had attempted to move the whole bow thruster, although help was available. There was a crane for him to use, but Jason wanted to do everything himself. They told me as the bow thruster fell, Jason attempted to catch it, but it had fell on top of him. 6 weeks later, after the accident, we sat just wondering why Jason would try to move such a heavy piece of machinery and put himself at risk. I tortured myself, asking why he would do this. In the meantime, Chris Wilson had phoned from America, and he told me over the phone he believed that Jason's own enthusiasm had killed him. Weeks later, when the health and safety came out, I was shown a photo of the thruster that Jason was working on, first on the bench and second on the ground where it had landed on Jason. Mr. Miller described what had happened to Jason as he had seen the accident on CCTV footage. He was testing the rotating hub, and I asked, did he try to catch it? And I was told Jason had no time, it was over on him so quickly. Jason was basically just doing his job. I was disgusted, and I found it cruel and misleading. The version of events could differ in any way, and lost any trust I had in his company there and then. Being led to believe by his employers the accident was Jason's fault was unforgivable. The health and safety began their investigation. Life became such a struggle for our family. Maria was only Christmas staff at Asda, and she would not return to work at Christmas. I'm a self-employed taxi driver, and after Christmas, I had to force myself back to work to keep a roof over our heads. It was all for my family. Maria's health deteriorated. She suffers from sarcoid, a lung disease, high blood pressure, depression, and of course a broken heart. No family should have to go through this. It took over a year for the health and safety to conclude their investigation, but we were told that they had decided to prosecute Jason's employers. The first court appearance was the 27th of June, and it would have saved us a lot of pain and suffering if they had just held their hands up there and then. But it went to trial, and on the 20th of January, an immediate trial began. And on the 22nd of January, Tyne Slipway and Engineering were fined $75,000 plus $47,936 costs. The judge's ruling was there was no risk assessment, he was unsupervised, uninstructed, and Jason was tragically lost to a result of health and safety shortcomings. I stood up in court and I told Harry Wilson, the owner, that he would never be forgiven. The judge told me, you cannot put a price on life, which I agree, but Tyne Slipway did just that. Their barrister compared another accident where someone had died within a large industrial company, and this company's profits were compared to Tyne Slipway's. And their barrister had said he thought an adequate fine in the region of £8,000 would be sufficient. And with the £75,000 fine that they received, they asked to pay it in instalments, and they threatened the fine would cost jobs. And would you believe Chris Wilson never showed up at court for any of the court dates, the one who failed to ensure Jason's safety, and I believe should have been the one in the dock. Not only did they fail my son, they disrespected him and they tried to blame him. At no point have they offered apology to my family. This hurts so deeply as Jason works so hard for his employers. He gave him his heart, soul, and ultimately he gave him his life. Jason's inquest was held on the 22nd and 23rd of May. I had studied all the witness statements myself. Myself and Chris Wilson were called to the stand that morning. First, I paid tribute to our beautiful son. I had my questions all prepared for Wilson. I found even then, after they'd been prosecuted and fined, I was still defending my son. I was meant to get a barrister to ask questions on our behalf, but I began to ask Wilson the questions myself. Afterwards, my solicitors, Thompsons and barristers were shocked the coroner just let me go. They hadn't known this before. Wilson had said he believed Jason to be qualified to do the job, as he'd been on the course in Norway. I asked him to look at his witness statement, which states, I only got brief information from Bromville of the contents of the course that Jason was booked on. Wilson said he didn't know what Jason was doing when he attempted to turn the hook using the bolt. It's not something he would have done, or Jason had been shown. I asked him when could he have been shown this. It was the first time he'd worked on a bolt thrust outside of the ship's nor to the first one that had been in weird docks for many years. And the yard manager, Dave Bell's witness statement stated, he said it's common practice to test the small bow thruster by holding the bolts and rotating the hull by hand. I could go on and on, there were so many contradictions. I wasn't surprised when Wilson didn't turn up for the second day of the inquest. Whilst waiting in the calf for the coroner's verdict, I was taken aback when the Tyne Slipways barrister approached me. He apologised, he said he was sorry and that he was just doing his job. The day before the inquest, Tyne Slipways barrister phoned my solicitor and admitted liability and attempted to prevent my family having legal representation at the inquest. And this was done before we even submitted a civil claim. I'd like to thank Hilda Palmer, as she got in touch on behalf of FACK and gave us support and made us aware of the government's destroying our Health and Safety Act and taking away our rights. I'd like to make a statement to the Prime Minister that health and safety is not a burden on business, but it's a necessity to protect our loved ones. And should not be relaxed, but it should be more stringent. My son's death could have and should have been easily avoided. And you tell me that risk assessments are a waste of time, and I'll tell you a simple risk assessment will save my son's life. There should have been supervision, and there should have been an adequate workbench, and he would have been with us today. As long as the government continues to make it easier for employers like Tyne Slipway and Engineering to sidestep, shirk or shortcut health and safety in the workplace, our loved ones will be hurt and killed. I'd rather health and safety be a millstone round the neck than a one-ton bow thrust that crushing our beautiful son to death. And Mr. Cromman, you're taking away what our unions have fought for over a century. Jason's granddad worked all his life in the mines. He was an NUM union representative, and he was also a safety officer, and he was known to stop production if there was a safety issue. Of course, you'd love him, wouldn't you, Mr. Cameron? It's wrong what you're doing. And think of Jason, who we saw laid out in his coffin, and think of what you want for your own children in the workplace. We mourn the dead, and we'll fight for the living. The government waters down its commitments to health and safety in our tears. I'd like to thank you for your time.